No, I mean, people that talk about benchmarks and withdrawals, what are we going to do? Disband CENTCOM? This was created in the early 70s when we assumed most of the foundation for the security in this region. CENTCOM was created by President Carter because of our interests in this region, economic, political, security interests. They haven't changed. If anything else, at the end of the Cold War, they were actually, I think, heightened in many respects. We're going to be in this part of the world. We aren't going to leave. Now, we can readjust our strategy for Iraq. We can extricate our troops from the sectarian violence. But we're going to have to contain the problems that could spill over and cause this critical part of the world to spin out of control. We need to rethink that kind of strategy, that kind of positioning. But more importantly, we need to rethink our relationships in that region. We have to build a collective security arrangement, a coalition arrangement, to replace the one we destroyed by going into Iraq now. The Gulf coalition was fragile. It supported our containment of Iran and Iraq before. Most of the leaders in this region that I talk to are asking me, what's the new arrangement? They are at least thinking past Iraq. They're thinking in strategic terms, and no one's engaging them on that level of discussion. There should be more in the way of burden sharing, more in the way of cooperative defense, more in the way of security assistance programs that help build the kind of region that can take care of itself with our help and with our involvement. There's no way out of that.
In a briefing paper you've written for the World Security Institute and also in the Battle for Peace, you write about realities. You say our first reality we should acknowledge is that there's no brilliant short-term strategic option or stroke of genius waiting to be unveiled. The second reality is that we cannot simply pull out as much as we may want to. The consequences of a destabilizing, chaotic Iraq sitting in the center of a critical region of the world could have catastrophic implications. The third reality is that there's no short-term solution. It will take years to stabilize Iraq. How many? I believe at least 5 to 7. And the fourth reality is that the problems cannot be solved by simply addressing the security issues. We're in the middle of a presidential campaign, and people are saying, stay in Iraq, support the surge, or set a date certain for withdrawal. Is either view, in your mind, tenable?
No. First of all, I think any attempt to fix Iraq, if you will, to commit to a larger involvement or intervention probably went away when we didn't adopt the Baker-Hamilton recommendations. I thought that would be a start. Certainly didn't go far enough. I think now the American people are becoming disillusioned. I think it's clear, though, that we cannot leave the region. We should naively think we're pulling out, that this is Somalia or Vietnam. And I think the debate should be amongst the candidates is how do we redesign the strategy for this region, protect our interests, create the kind of coalition involvement that would help support this and share the burden. We need that kind of imagination out there. And it isn't just about Iraq. It's about how we engage, or what do we do about Iran and Syria, our involvement in the Middle East peace process, the rebuilding of relationships with former allies that has been stressed and strained, and how we deal with a cooperative way to counter the extremism that's on the rise. The current bombings in Algeria and Morocco should be of great concern to us and to that part of the world.
If the president brought you in and said, General Zinni, for one day be my war czar, go down and talk to the Democrats in the Senate and the House, what would you tell them and what would you tell him?
Well, I would go back to the realities that I wrote and you mentioned. Let's face it, we're not going to pull out. We can't continue to go it alone, and we can't continue to go it the way we are doing this now. We need to redesign a strategy. We need support, bipartisan support on that strategic design. We need to engage our allies in the region. We need to think through who we're going to have a dialogue with and who we're not. What we're going to do about engagement in the peace process, more formally and more directly involved in the mediation. I think all these pieces that make up a strategy are necessary. We need to think through things like our security assistance programs out there. We want to build allies with a capability that can join us on any battlefield. We need to rethink how we operate in the international and regional community. We have a United Nations that in many ways is broken. There's been just criticism of the United Nations, but the United Nations offers international legitimacy in what we might do. We need to reconstruct the kind of involvement that allowed us to do the intervention in the interim years between the first Gulf War and this Gulf War. All these things and all these pieces are what goes into making up a foreign policy and a regional policy for this critical part of the world.
Many have suggested that the Army is near broken because of the constant redeployments. Can we sustain the number of troops we have in Iraq for years to come?
No. You know, what's shocking about all this, if you look at past wars, in 3 to 4 years into a war, we've had remarkable transformations of our military. Just think about World War II, where we were when Pearl Harbor was attacked, what our military looked like. I mean, all our equipment was inferior to our enemy, the size of our forces, our organization, our tactics. 3.5 years later, we were a superpower. We dominated on all those areas. Even in Vietnam, at the tactical level, we made adjustments and adaptations, and we increased the size of the force to meet the commitment. Although we've mouthed the words about this being a long war and a long struggle, the very forces that it places the greatest demand upon, our ground forces, our soldiers and Marines, we've seen no increase, no change, no adaptability on the battlefield. We're still confused about the enemy. We're stifled by the IED attacks and the problems we face. And these adjustments over 4 years have not been made. We have to ask ourselves why. What happened to transformation? Why was the design not right? What have we done to adjust? Our military, especially our Army and Marine Corps, are not going to be able to continue this kind of rotation. Traditionally, you need 3 units for every one you have deployed. That's the ideal in terms of training, reconstructing the unit, the kind of quality time, the quality of life and family time necessary to rebuild the unit before it goes out. We're down to almost 1 to 1.
Realistically, how many American troops do you think will be in Iraq by the end of 2008?
I think by the end of 2008, you may see a slight reduction of what we have now, but I think it's going to be pretty close to the same. I would say they may not all be in Iraq. We may see a realignment. We may go into a containment strategy that helps us control the borders. We may position troops where we can react under certain circumstances, where the rules of engagement would have us go after al-Qaeda, reinforce the Iraqis. Probably by then extract ourselves certainly from any of the sectarian violence in the areas where it's Sunni on Shia, or places where the Iraqis should be taking the lead in dealing with it.
That could be a real bloodbath.
It could be, but you know, and I have nothing to base this on, but I have a sense the Iraqi people, the vast majority, have been sickened by the violence. I think the vast majority want this to end. It's how you build their confidence. The enemy wants fear, apathy, or support from the populace. You have to change that around. If we start getting jobs, if the economic conditions improve, if they start having some faith in their government, if policies of mediation and reconciliation are put into play in some more formal way, you could start winning that battle. And I think that's the key in the end.
You write in the Battle for